College, you know it, I know it. It's something people go to after high school, and something that some people find joy in. Honestly, it's a new experience. I didn't really get the traditional college experience like some people I know by dorming, but I am still going to college. I got half of this experience, and it's just about maximizing your time there. I hate to glaze college like every other YouTuber who talks about like colleges, but it is an optimal and ideal social environment because it's fun, and apparently living in dorms is fun if that's your little schmick, but you have to take classes in between the fun. You get credits, number varying depending on the class, and eventually you get to graduate. Where I go to school, it is 120 credits, which requires me to take 40 classes of 3 credits each. Over the course of 8 semesters, this means, on average, I take, with no summer or winter classes, 5 classes per semester, give or take. In these intro to the experience, I took 5 classes for my fall semester freshman year, technically because it's the average. These classes were Writing 1, a wellness class, Intro to Communications, like COM or something, Intro to Film, and Italian 1 because I had to. Overall, mainly just gen ed classes I had to take to start my major, which was film, I don't know what it was. I thought it would be a cool idea just to share what I learned in these classes and throughout my freshman fall semester. And here's my schedule for reference in the first semester. And yes, it is a wacky schedule. The first class of the week would always be Intro to Communications. This class was considered a, quote, hybrid class, mainly because I learned the difference between this and an actual class. And if a teacher dares to put their class as a hybrid class, that means they will not teach you anything valuable in that class. Because it literally was the definition of unpreparedness for any meeting. Before I even talk about how the class was structured, let me tell you about one of the meetings where the teacher showed up 14 and a half minutes late, almost the law 15 and you can leave. Nope, couldn't have that. After this, they still tried to carry on the class as if there wasn't 15 minutes gone from the 75-minute block. If you were that late, you should cancel class or at least skip past some sections. We still had the normal presentation that day, so we still couldn't even finish it. And I was flabbergasted by this. But anyways, the course worked a bit differently. If you were in this class, you would listen to a lecture for the whole hour 15 class block. Luckily, it wasn't 3 hours. It's the perfect environment to play Peggle in, or any small game my laptop could run. Basically, you would listen, quote, per se, to the lessons, and then you would do a discussion post. These were the worst thing known to man. Don't know why they existed. A discussion post was a post having to be 250 words plus to a weekly chapter we had to read, which mind you is a chapter we never went over in class. This would go anywhere from movies and 3D movies to radio to anywhere else in this broad spectrum that is communications. Once in the semester, you would be the discussion facilitator. This would mean you have to respond to everybody and write a summary of what everybody said in their discussion posts. By the way, you still have to answer, and you have to write a 500-word summary just because you have to know what they said. Anyways, because this class was the first class I'd take for my major, it was a very broad spectrum, and it was an intro, so that means you don't really go over anything like you actually would. You just go over the history of what's being discussed, because that's what intro means. You just go over how it was developed. History of radio, history of social media, and stuff like that. We learned the history of it while we just watched some videos as limited time. It's a good thing I never spoke up when I had to in the class, because other than the reason that nobody talked to each other in that class, and everybody really just had to be there. Nobody cared, so it was really silent. You weren't allowed to talk past 5 seconds. If you dared to try to talk for longer than 5 seconds, all you would hear is, yeah, of course, or anything of the sorts. Anything to get you to stop talking, because we were, quote, running low on time, and we have limited time. But it's a hybrid class, so you know. There were also the FCC and the idea of libel and slander on somebody. Basically, all you need to know is libel is writing false statements about somebody, and slander is an oral statement that's false. That's really all it is to it. But that was a whole class. That was a whole 75 minutes being explained that. And then after Mondays, I would do the weekly discussion post and not care about the rest of the class. It was really easy to bang out the assignments since I could just do it after the class. Then that would be it. I'd eat my lunch and then quickly leave since I had nothing going on after that. Honestly, the class wasn't hard. It was just boring. And since I needed to take it, I had no choice. I'd give it a 5 out of 10 on the difficulty scale and a 2 out of 10 on the enjoyability scale. Before moving on to the other classes, which will be in order, it is important to know how the scheduling system works, since it's kind of unique, I think. You get to choose your schedule, but only partially. I don't know how other colleges do this, because some friends of mine have told me that their colleges they go to don't let them pick out their schedule. The school picks it for them. Kind of similar here, but not really. You were told by your guidance counselor, whatever, what classes you should take to get to your college career or whatever, but you got a list of generated schedules you could pick from. You just have to pick the classes you want to take, or the ones you, need to take for the gen eds or whatever, and you would get a generated schedule from this. This semester I had a whole 74 I could have chosen from, so I scrolled to see which ones would give me Fridays off. That's really all that matters. Luckily, it was the case for this semester. I picked the one that you see here, and that's how I ended up with this wacky schedule, because I found out quick, simple enough. Even though it's the most complicated looking thing, looking back at it, and it gave me Fridays off and let me out early. It was a big deal for me. This is also back in June, so I didn't really care what I had to do because I was just excited for summer. I didn't really care about the gen ed requirements, even though that was the only reason I picked Italian. Having to take 2 language classes is one of the most stressful things, and since they don't offer any languages that aren't Romance languages, it really made it boring to pick one of those languages. Next up throughout my week, speaking of the languages, would be Italian 1. Honestly, an easy class, but just weirdly taught. It wasn't my first choice for a language. I would have taken German or Japanese, but I digress because it's a different thing. It was good enough as a third option since Italian 2 gives me another gen ed requirement. And it was my first class on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but it was also the smallest. There were about 10 people in the class, mainly because a lot of people took the other class, and because everybody skipped all the time. That's the difference too. And it makes sense, though, because it's not like a really early block. And I swear, this room had every technical error known to man. One day we were gonna watch a movie in Italian to learn, but then the professor's, projector glitched out in the Netflix glitch, so we couldn't watch the movie. So that didn't happen, we just did a worksheet. Now, I have the mentality of language learning, that if you want to be fluent, you should study, but also take some notes, but not fully. Using this knowledge, I didn't take any notes, and I just remembered what I learned, and it'd be hard to forget most of the things taught, considering we had a lot of homework for the class, sort of. It'd take an hour to 2. We would do online work for the homework, usually just due before the next class, so it wasn't too difficult. It mainly was just to act like a review, but sometimes it wouldn't be. Sometimes we'd have to learn new stuff on our own, depending on the language, and that's okay. It's not that hard since Italian is in category 1 on the difficulty to learn chart. The language isn't that hard to learn if you know any other Romance language, like Spanish or French, since barely anybody speaks Romanian. All you have to know is that the Italian za has 7 cases: il, lo, la, le, l, I, and gli, all depending on the gender, if it's masculine or feminine, and if it's plural or not, and if it begins as a vowel. For more information, consult the graph. This was the chart that was hardest to remember, as we only learned some, RA, ERA, and ERA verbs, mainly towards the end of the semester. Overall, it was really just the basics, as you would assume the name of the course, but other than that, it really is also about remembering how to conjugate the verbs, which English doesn't do really, but which no, in the previous chart, refer to this separate chart. Not too complicated, just have to wonder why so many? Why do they need all of those? And the real question is, I don't know. I really don't know. And I could care less, honestly. I only have to take Italian 1 and 2. We just learned a random amount of verbs, and honestly, I expected more from the class. But I also didn't know what to expect, considering the verbs we learned wouldn't really be useful, as the Italians say cosi in situations. I think it's okay. The main takeaway from the class I learned was that honestly it depends on how the teacher teaches a language class. I never had to take a language class in high school, and honestly just tried winging it. There's a bunch of languages, which is probably why I'm not bilingual. So this is new to me. The idea of the teacher using external sources to mainly teach was something I had to get through out like the semester. Luckily, I was able to have this class with my friend, and so it wasn't as difficult since we were both able to work on the homework together and stuff. Overall, the class was fun, but I don't think I will be returning to any Romance languages anytime soon, unless I have to. Maybe it's just the teacher, but I felt like I wasn't able to fully understand how words were grouped together, because we weren't really describing how it worked. We were only really given examples of brief descriptions. Maybe it works, but it usually depends on the level you're at for it to work, like the CEFR scale, not usually for beginners. For the scores, I would give an enjoyment score of 7 out of 10 since it's engaging and learning a new language is always fun, usually to start. For a difficulty score, it would be a 4 out of 10 because of how often it was canceled and how much new stuff you kind of had to learn on your own. As I would walk to my next class, across campus, I would see everybody being depressed. They all walk like robots as they walk to their next class. It's crazy because I thought people would be happier here than in high school, but that's probably because I'm used to like popular kids who yell with no thought behind their saying. But they've all evolved to be frat bros now. Then I'd get out of the piece and walk to the next class through the quad, because I'm pretty sure every college has the quad. This one I swear was never canceled, unlike my Italian class, which was in total canceled for 2 weeks plus total. This one sadly didn't have anything about that, but luckily, like my comm class, it was a hybrid. I think I would have done better if this wasn't a hybrid because I had the weirdest learning experience here. It was so bad. Hybrid learning is different because teachers expect you to learn most of the stuff outside of the school. And what I mean by this, and my learning experience being weird, is that overall, nothing in the class would be taught, and I always felt like the stuff I learned was not even related to the class. I always liked health, and I was like, I'll pick it when we picked our classes at orientation. That, and it was the first one to appear that was an honors class. I didn't get there to learn what we learn. There's a way to describe the class, the way of learning, and it's called stupid. Stupid and repetitive, honestly. At the end of the semester, I heard from one of my friends I made in that class that the spring semester teacher is better. Of course that's the case. That made me realize all these classes depend on who the teacher is, something that seems to make or break a class a lot of the time. Basically for a week, we did readings that were assigned, and we did reading quizzes. This is so similar to the discussion posts that I did not try to differentiate them. I did them almost immediately as they were assigned, just to get it over with and absorb the information. Now there's a lot of stuff I learned outside of the class because honestly the readings were barely enough and the weekly discussion posts we had to do, which I swear every hybrid class does one of these, were not enough to actually learn off of it. So, from a bunch of YouTube videos and readings in my free time, I had learned so much more. I had a lot of free time too, so maybe that was also because of it. I learned all the stuff we should have learned in the class. The 3 things I really like to point out about the class that I learned is that America should use natural sugars instead of whatever we currently use, which is unnatural sugars. We just won't change because it's cheaper, and the cheaper to live in states use this, and they're also the most obese states. And the next thing I would like to point out is I learned is usually poor areas in underdeveloped underdeveloped states, like the South, of course, will use these measurements to make people buy their thing because it's cheaper. And if we only raise federal minimum wage, no surprise, because you don't even need statistics to prove it. You just need to go down there. It is known that the South is obese if you've ever gone down there. The third thing I'd like to point out that I learned is the most useful, unironically. The total amount of protein that you need to take in daily is your body weight, divide it by 3, and convert 1 pound equals 1 gram of protein, and you get how much protein you need. Bam! An equation to help you gain muscle, even though you kind of need to do more, but whatever. The only other notable thing, is that we learned how to do flexibility tests and stuff like that. I got an averaging good on all of them, so I don't really care too much. I got a pull on a few things, but that's really unimportant right now. Overall, we learned that and how to use the gym machines, which is kind of useful if you've never been to the gym before, but honestly, now you can, I guess. The class did act like an introduction to working out than anything else, but not wanting to claim it as an exercise science class. At least I can say I'm done with the class now, but it was something that I would have eventually had to take, no matter what. Nutrients and exercise are those other things that were explained, but not really in depth. We just went over it in class and I zoned out. Luckily, I didn't have to take a first-year experience class because of the honors program. That's a plus at least. The real question was if this class was better than it or not, since we had some lectures about the library and stuff like that, like how to use it. I will probably never use this, but at least I have the knowledge on how to. Overall, I also learned from this class, if I didn't learn it from the comm class, to take hybrid classes with a grain of salt. It's like rolling a dice, since the teacher will probably put everything online. It all depends on how you learn, honestly, and since I'm only able to do either fully online or full in person, it was more harder, yet at the same time easier. The class did get rid of one of my gen eds, which is good, I guess, so yeah, that would be good overall, and now I don't have to take it again. Luckily, I kind of already knew everything we were going over in the class, but I feel like that's a little normal for this type of stuff, but it definitely showed for our final project. For the final project, we had to make a wellness plan. One of the hardest things to do, since to get a good score, you basically had to be like, I'll go to the gym more, and kind of just glaze the ideas the class presents to you. I just said I would go to the gym more, and all that pizzazz I wanted. You could probably watch like 6 videos from professionals on it and take notes, and you would probably be able to do the project, even if you couldn't attend the classes. Overall, for a difficulty scale, I'd give it a 6 out of 10. Not because it's actually difficult, but because you had to learn a bunch of new stuff through readings and stuff. The class was set up to be reviewed for what you had read and talked about in the discussion posts. For an enjoyable scale, it tried to beat comm class for the lowest score, but since I was able to talk to people in that class, I'd give it a 3 out of 10. Now, for the last class I had on Tuesdays and Thursdays, Writing 1. Honestly, it's a pretty fun class if my class was more interesting. Since this is a gen ed, like you had to take it because it's your first semester in college, they expect you to take it. So they have a million of these classes offered. I was stuck with the most boring people. They really just didn't care about it. Oh my god. And since the class was more discussion-based, they relied on people getting into the subject and actually talking. I was one of the people that talked so that I could get a high enough GPA for the semester. But it was me and like 3 other people who would actually talk and participate. There was a lot of potential for actual things that were interesting, but people really don't care. You also got kind of pity points for just being in class, which is what most people did until the very end. One day, nobody was really giving their thoughts, and so the teacher called on somebody. This was insane. When she got called on, the teacher asked, "What are your thoughts on this?" And she straight up, not kidding, frong, for real on God, said, "I have no thoughts on this." What kind of golden retriever mentality is that? I have no thoughts on this. Bro, this is generic class everybody has to take. It's not that hard. No way you were saying I have no thoughts on this. When you were in a Writing 1 class, a first semester class, participate a little bit. Other than dealing with people who were forced there, the way the class was set up was more fun than most of the other classes. The topic of the class was something along the lines of civil duty and like citizenship. I forgot! Something kind of important for the youth, but something that is good to know in the back of your mind, like the subconscious stuff. I learned stuff like the Edward Snowden case, and I wrote a few essays about like civil rights and civil disobedience and whatnot. In these essays, honestly, it was just reading something and we had to summarize the papers, which was talking about some older people like Henry David Thoreau and how he committed like tax fraud or some other things. You know, he got out scot-free. Why can't you? We also read that MLK Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail, which talks about his beliefs and what he thinks about what was going on around him. Honestly, it was a pretty good letter from what I remember. But we only had to write 2 essays in the class, and the most notable one was the final one, because, you know, it's the final one. And the final essay really was just everything we learned in the class, but in a good way. You had to put your belief on what when a riot was right and when it was wrong. Basically just saying what justifies a protest and what makes it into a riot, since those are 2 different things. I just said as long as nobody gets hurt during a protest, it has a right cause. Nobody should ever get hurt, and when people get hurt, it shows that it's gone too far. It shows that human lives are not really a matter of what has to be done and stuff like that. Humanity is always something that makes us who we are. I learned this when we had to write about it, and how people can always get behind a protest where lives are not affected. But when people are affected and hurt, that's when people start to turn their eyes to it. It makes sense since it's part of who we are as a species. That was my response to the final essay. I was able to get an A in that class since I actually participated and got good grades on the papers. The class was also pretty enjoyable because I always wanted a class that relied on discussion. It was just kind of a shame that it was the class full of boring people, because I think if more people were involved, it would have been actually interesting, but you know, whatever. The class was overall more fun than I thought it was going to be when I heard the theme was citizenship, and that kind of sounded boring in the summer. For the difficulty score, I'd give it a 1 out of 10. I was able to finish all the papers early since they were all posted day 1 of the course. That's the good type of teachers. The teachers was also a lenient grader, so I was able to get higher grades on papers than I thought I would have. For enjoyability, I'd give it a 5 to a 6 out of 10, but with an asterisk next to it, because, you know, it depends on who you have in your class, honestly, which is why it would depend. It's so boring when you have the bad people, but so it seems like it would be more interesting if you had good people. But I would have recommended this class if there was actually more class engagement and people actually cared about stuff like this. Before I move on to the last class of the week, it is important to mention the second part of college, the external learning. As mentioned before, college is 2 parts, classes and making friends through extracurricular activities. High asterisks on the name for them, because they really aren't. They're just trying to force you to do stuff other than stay in your dorm. The reason this is important and being brought up now is on the first Tuesday of the semester, the school holds their version of the club fair. As every club, as long as they signed up, and you can sign up for the ones that you're interested in stuff. I did a few of them and ended up staying in a few of them. I signed up for the writing club there, the Pokemon club, and the Minecraft club. Even though I signed up for these 3 clubs, I only ended up staying in the writing club and the Pokemon club. Mainly because I didn't plan on playing on the Minecraft server. I just ended up going to a few meetings, and that was it, since it was a mainly online club. I had no benefit for joining, so it was neither a socializing club or an activity club. I really don't know why I signed up, and I feel like those are the 2 categories of clubs, and I'll get into those later and how they really work. Overall, it was useful to go to, and I'll probably keep going to these to see if any new clubs appear when whatever. But since I always like going to them, I find it fun and engaging, I guess. That's the most thing, since it's natural biology, but at college is about having fun and getting out there and growing as an individual. Some background to the last class before I actually talk about it and what I learned, because this is important. 1, it is an almost 3-hour long class, but that's not too much since we learned by going out and actually practicing and filming on our own. The background of the class that's important is that this is the first class you have to take to get into the film major. There are 2 different paths you can go on if you are in this major. A cinema path, digital and stuff. A physical film path. I'm not a sociopath, so I didn't do that one. And a documentary path, I guess I'm not an empath, so I didn't go on that one. This means you have to train. This class kind of has to train you on all of these, and which is kind of important to knowing which path you're gonna take. but knowing that we had 4 projects total for the class. One of them was a representative space. Honestly, kind of easy. The others were a narrative edit project and a documentary at the very end, with alongside a physical film project. Luckily, my teammates carried that one. Now, going into the specifics of each of these projects, the representative space one, as said before, is easy. You just go out somewhere and you represent the space, as the project is named. It's easy, but of course the first time I do this, the tripod I had to rent out from the school is broken, so we couldn't use it. Oh yeah, you do have to rent out the equipment from EQ. Every time, because we use Macs, but at least it's free, I guess. Speaking of Macs, these are literally the worst things I've ever used. Why is it built like this? I get it's for productivity, but I just feel like it was less creative. I felt less creative when I was doing these, and it also took me double the length of time I would take compared to Windows. And we had to, and I mean had to, use these because it was part of the course and stuff. I'm just hoping that in the next level the cameras used just don't do what the current cameras do, which is they don't work with Windows, but they work with Macs, so it's gatekeeping files from said Windows. After doing the space project, I really just learned about surds in the camera and actually leveling the tripod. We also got to see everybody else's project, and this one kid in my class didn't even attempt to level the tripod. I swear I was trying to tilt my head to see what it was going on because of the kind of rushed, and they even admitted it was rushed. It was a rushed project, but overall I had to turn this one late because I never learned to trust EQ fully and to book it far in advance. I don't even trust them now. Luckily, this wasn't an issue for the next projects, as they were all group projects. This is where my film group and the one class I'd actually make real friends in for the semester, which is really ironic. We had to do this narrative edit, and luckily I was able to use my commuting as a reason not to rent out from EQ. This saved me so much, since I parked so far away from the rent out place. One time I had to actually drive it there, and it was pain. All of those dang equipment. We filmed the whole thing in 6 hours, we speed ran it, and we all had to edit it differently. That was what the whole project was. I had to do this twice, because I learned DaVinci Resolve doesn't actually export the video fully, and doesn't render it automatically. It was such a shame, since I had such a good edit the first time. Then the edits were shown, and I guess everybody had similar names, but different types of film. So when the teacher pulled did everybody talk about the homework move? It was a little scary. Got a good grade on the assignment though. Even though he took points off for 3 seconds of dead noise. But whatever. Master's degree. The next project was the physical film project. This was kind of the hardest one to film, since everything we recorded was permanent. It's really hard. You cannot delete anything. The digital age is now. Zoe filmed this like a detective movie, and it was also the stage sets we had to set up. That was another hard part. This was kind of useful and kind of helped us getting some shots because EQ actually worked and let us use the stage. But the movie ended up being really good since 2 of our group members edited the physical film. This is good since I don't know how to do it, and they actually had a passion for it, and I kind of zoned out when he was teaching. And then there was the documentary, which was about one of our group members' situationship. Kind of normal update on that, every week. Somehow we had enough content since this was a whole different lore. We just kind of ran along with it. We had so much content that we ended up having to not use most of it. It was the longest documentary when we did the presentation of the final projects at the end of the semester, and that's what brings us throughout the semester. We did the final a bit differently from all the other classes. On a 100 question quiz, like a psychopath in comm class would have had, we showed the movies and the documentaries from all the intro to film classes at once at 6 p.m. Yes, there was a lot, and it ended at 8 p.m. I think there were about 20 pieces of media shown total, but it was a lot to handle. The main takeaway from this is that film students have a style of making films. Literally, I can notice a style, and it's insane. What I noticed throughout them is that they use this idea that you can tell it's limited budget or just film students, maybe part of a hive mind. There just seems to be a style. that they follow. It's like A24, and I swear, it makes it kind of weird to watch if you don't like it. And it's just a natural evolution from like theater kids in high school to film majors in college, but that's still a work in progress to that theory. As mentioned before, the style mainly is something that I can only describe as an A24 film mixed with some quirky ideas. It's not bad, but I don't want anybody thinking it's bad, because it's not. It just can get repetitive so much, because you can like sense when they have the style. And I think that what they want like down, but don't really stretch limits. They like don't really extend what's possible. They just do what they're comfortable with, which is my take on the movie industry. I think movies should always be reaching for new limits and seeing new techniques. I think most industries should do this, but don't. But anyways, back to the movie part. The movies ranged in theme from a cemetery comedy to a thriller film of somebody walking down a hallway, I think. Question mark. Honestly, there were like two genres. Those being comedies and thrillers, and they had to be 3 minutes long, so it was kind of hard to make them like any different between them. Overall, I did like all of them. I thought they did a good job in all of that. As for the documentaries, yeah, these are something. Yeah, I could say that. We can put it that way. Really, that's the best way to put it. They ranged in quality, but I do think ours was the best in like the whole thing, since our film member who edited it really cared about the subject matter, and we spent the most amount of time on it. And it was probably because it was his situationship, but we also probably spent the most amount of time on it than anybody else, and he also set it up like a mockumentary than anything else. Again, the documentaries range in quality from god-awful and rushed to pretty good, with a few flaws. Everybody knows about the B-roll footage was the interview type of style, which is just what every documentary follows now. It's a style you'll see in the History Channel or mainly any documentary. It is the works every time method for the genre, honestly. The problem is one of these documentaries, and I remember this because it was really badly recorded. The video was alright at best, really, and the audio was peaking, and it was the worst thing heard the ear, especially on like one of these speakers. After this, we got our scores and got to leave. This is the biggest relief, as I was starving that night. It was film, and the film group I was actually in was fun to hang out with, and I'm pretty sure we were the only ones that stayed friends after the class ended. Overall, for the scores, for enjoyability, I'd give it a 9 out of 10, since going out and filming was the most fun of it, and it was definitely my favorite class of the semester. For difficulty scores, I'd say 4 out of 10 was an asterisk. Just depends on how hard your film group wants to work and how much time you give yourself to work on these projects. As mentioned before, there were two types of clubs. There were social clubs, where you can socialize, and what they have as the theme is kind of in the background. I would categorize the writing club as this, as I felt like I got barely writing done in there, but I got more socializing, and I put that more forward, and I was able to make more friends and have more fun. Overall, it makes the time more fun when you try to meet new people. Writing club honestly was just a discussion class, mainly about current events, since this year was an election year, and somebody in that club was a political science major, but that's a different discussion. Anyways, this is the club where honestly I made the most friends, since I was getting involved, and it promoted that social environment. It's always good when a club can do that, honestly, because that's what college is about. Of course, some people wrote, but not too many shared, so I don't know the progress of it. It's kind of smaller in the fall for some reason. It's kind of unclear what happened to make it grow, but that might be because it's the first few meetings, and that's also for a separate time. People would usually talk with each other throughout the club, and it felt like its own little group, honestly, like its own friend group. Now for the activities club, this is where they have the activities set up and try to have people have fun throughout those. It was some socialization, but not too much. These ones were fun, but honestly, I don't think I made too many friends from these, which kind of stinks because I feel like I could have. And this is what the Pokemon Club was, honestly. There's a bunch of activities that made it Pokemon themed, and some of these were outside of the club, I went to some of them, and I did win a Snorlax mug at Pokemon Bingo. But honestly, these activities would be like tournaments and a lot of similar things. It's kind of based on Pokemon knowledge, which I didn't have a lot of, so I never really went to these tournaments. So I did go to Pokemon Bingo. As mentioned before, and I won a prize. Keep in mind, 100% win rate in Bingo. And that's like not a brag or anything, but I wanted something, and some people didn't win anything. What a shame. Other than that, the club did bring something, but it went by, and that's the best way I can describe it. It's like weird. But clubs are the best when it's one or the other. The reason I really didn't like the Minecraft club was only because it was none of these, and it was more online, and I'm not really an online single player type gamer. But it's not bad. It's not bad. But I just needed it to be one of those things to fuel my engagement. Overall, college is good. I'm not saying it's not, even if club budgets are being depleted because of... It's always the first semester, but it just depends on if you need to go. Like, if you're a business major, you obviously need to go. That kind of makes or breaks your experience. Of course, as a film major in an over-competitive field, I do need to go. Other than that, that's it about the first semester. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Pretty please. Goodbye.